I went down. I went in this room. I got called into the meeting. I went in the room and lined with Hell's Angels. Everybody's staring at me. And basically they said, we're going to become number one in your life. And you got to put your wife and your kids and your mom and your dad and your job. Everything's got to come second now. If you want to take this step, we're the primary people in your life and we come first. And, I couldn't think of anything to say at first. And I squeaked out, I know. And then, old man John, he had a real gruff voice. And he goes, you don't know nothing. And he told Paul, one of the members, he goes, throw that patch at him. And they threw the patch at me. And I held it up and I held it out, looked at it, and looked like that emblem, the death heads on the back was staring at me.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the next episode of Game of Crimes with Murph in the Morning. So glad you came back this week. Got a guest that I've been talking about for several months now. This is kind of special because, occasionally, I always have cops, I have first responders, I have military folks on here. Occasionally, we bring somebody from the other side of that thin blue line that we talk about here on Game of Crimes, and such is the case today with our guest. Honestly, I'm kind of tongue-tied right now because we're looking at a legend here. Even if he was not on the same side I was, this is George Christie, who, if you know anything about the Hells Angels, you'd probably recognize that name because there's only one other name that is probably on the same level, and I'm not going to mention it, at least not now. We might talk about that person later on, but it was part of the Hells Angels as well. But ladies and gentlemen, please welcome George Christie. George, welcome to the show, brother.
I appreciate being here, Murph. We've talked a couple of times now, and it's been a gas. I'm sure this is going to be real exciting, so...
Yeah, well, this is after reading your book and doing some research on you. Holy cow, I've started looking at your social media and I'm thinking, I need you as my social media marketing person because your numbers are pretty far up there, man.
Well, I've been putting a lot of time into it. I thought it was kind of funny is last few years I was in the club, a lot of things were changing and people started scrutinizing who people were friends with on social media, which I found ludicrous. And I said, hey, man, I can't be friends with this guy because you don't like him. It's kind of like high school,
Oh, yeah.
But,
yeah.
The social media world's some tough guys out there. They send me some really nasty notes sometimes.
You know what? I'm still getting hate mail on social media from people because of Pablo Escobar, who's been dead for over 30 years.
Right. And what's funny is I answer my hate mail, but it's got to be entertaining.
Yeah.
And if it's not entertaining, I just delete it.
They say don't read the messages. I can't help myself. I read them.
I can't help myself either, It's one of those things I just can't stay away from.
It's amazing how brave people get when there's anonymity involved, isn't it?
Oh, it is amazing.
They'll say things behind your back that they won't say to your face.
Yeah, well, that's an absolute fact. It's funny. Sometimes I'll write these people back, and in the end, they apologize and they go, "Well, you don't seem like such a bad guy." I go, "Well, you don't either." But the world's a crazy place for living in now. It's insane,
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. When some of the people that I talk to regularly, they said, "Hey, Murph, who's your next guest coming up?" And I said, "You're not going to believe it. I got George Christie on here." And they go, "The HA guy?" I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Do you know his background?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing my research." And they said, "Have you spoken to him yet?" And I said, "Yeah, I did." And you know what? He's very well spoken. He's intelligent. He's very cordial. He was polite. He was respectful. Wow, I never thought about that about George. We're going to build your reputation up a little bit, George.
Well, I hope so. Maybe I'll get a couple extra followers out of this whole thing. But I am in opposite sides of the tracks, but sometimes I wonder, not so far apart politically or, philosophically speaking.
I had my first run-in with cops when I was 10 years old. I very easily could have gone to that other side of that thin blue line, but this was back in the 60s, and the cops then had the discretion to make good street decisions. And instead of, we're trying to break in a house at nighttime, and instead of putting us in jail, they took us home to our parents, which was worse than going to jail, to be quite honest with you.
Probably.
A lot worse. But I think that left an impact on me.
It's funny. I lived in Anaheim, California. This was back in the late 50s, early 60s, and Disneyland had opened, and I lived right up the street from Knott's Berry Farm on Brookhurst Street. And I was out in front of my house with my mom one afternoon, and these guys at the end of the street revving the motor on this car. And you know how a car, when you put the brakes on but rev the motor, that lurches back and forth. And this thing was just like waiting to get out of the starting gate. And these guys came by, and it was all the guys I had hung with. And they had gone out and stole this car, and they were joyriding it. And about 3-4 weeks after that, my mom and dad made the decision they're going to get me out of that environment, take me up to Ventura County, Camarillo, California, to what was billed as one of the safest cities in the United States at the time. And that's really where I got introduced to the whole outlaw motorcycle world. Yeah, so they took me out of the frying pan, put me in the fire, so to speak.
And, we're going to talk about this towards the end too, but I also want to go ahead and let George, his first book. This is Exile on Front Street. I can't read the rest of it on there. My Life as a Hell's Angel and Beyond. If you want to know what goes on inside the motorcycle gangs, I highly recommend this book. And again, we're gonna talk about it at the end of the interview, which will be tomorrow. But you can find it on Amazon. That's where I got my copy. George has a website. We'll talk about that too. I'll put all that out there. And George, I'm also going to put this on our website, so people will be able to go on my book page and click on your book, and it'll take them right to Amazon. They can order their book there. But I want to tell everybody how we met, because I'm East Coast, George West Coast. We've got a mutual friend. I had heard about George at the Southern California Gang Conference. I got one of their shirts on today in honor of those folks out there. Mel and Santi, guys, thank you so much for everything you do for everybody in California, especially the law enforcement community and their families. I think it was Mel was telling me, have you ever heard of George Christie? Do you know who he is? And he was telling me about it. So I started thinking about it. And next thing, I had an LAPD officer on the show named Jamie McBride. Jamie is a hoot. I mean,
he is a hoot. Now, there's a guy that could have went either way. He used to come by the clubhouse in Ventura when he was like 11, 12 years old. And he eventually became LAPD. And he's two daughters, both officers.
Yep. Yeah, good people. In fact, we're going to get Tony on the show here in a month or so, I hope. We've been talking. So if you haven't heard Jamie's interview yet, it's episode 162. It came out on September 16th of 24. So go back and listen to it, because I tell you, when we finished, I had tears running down my cheeks. And you'll see what I mean when you watch Jamie on the screen here.
Yeah, he's a character.
But so he made the introduction for me to George, sent me his phone number, and like I say, George responded immediately. And I've already sang his praises here about how he responded. But what we do here, George, is start out just by talking about your background. And I know about your background because it's in your book, but if you would just tell our listeners where you grew up, what your family dynamics were, your mom and dad, how they interacted, going to school, just that kind of thing.
Well, my whole family, my grandparents, both sides of the family, came from Greece. You talk about the old country. My grandmother was 12 when she got on the boat, came over here. My grandfather had come over a year earlier and established himself. He was a shoe maker and shoe repairman. She's 13 years old, man. She was married to a guy she was betrothed to. By the family. They came over here and made their way to Ventura and kind of set up stakes, Greek heritage on both sides. It was a big Greek community here. I just grew up in kind of a traditional household of Greeks. It was a very small family. I didn't have any brothers or sisters, aunts and uncles on each side of the family, but somewhat isolated. They were kind of settler problems within the community. They had the Daughters of Penelope, and then they had a group that was for the women and for the men, the HEPA, and that was where all the old timers would go and smoke and drink and play cards and whatnot. So my grandfather and my parents were strict. I remember one time asking my grandfather, I wanted to borrow some money from him. My cousin and I, there was a pharmacy on the corner that had an actual soda fountain in it. We would go down there. For 10 cents, you could get a Coke, and they'd poured a shot of cherry in there. Yeah. We make cherry Cokes before they had them. I went in to my grandfather, and I must have lost the coin toss or something, but my cousin and I was the one that petitioned him. I said, hey, Papu, grandfather in Greek, I said, Johnny and I want to borrow a quarter from you. And he put down his mallet, wiped off his hands, reached in his pocket. He had a little pocket book he carried in his left breast pocket. And he pulled out the book, flipped it open. And he goes, you guys still owe me 20 cents. He wouldn't give us the money. Of course, we went in the house, cried to Yaya, my grandmother, and she gave us the money. But, very strict, traditional family. Yeah. My grandfather sat at the head of the table, and he didn't start eating until he did. He actually literally cut the bread or break the bread and start the meal. So I came very traditional. Go to Greek school.
What was your name before it was changed to Christie?
On my
Your
dad's
Greek
side
name.
of the family, Flacos and Hos Polos on my grandfather's side. So they shortened it to Blasey for my mother's father, and Christie for my side of the family, which I never understood because my grandparents always talked about the Greeks were the superior and all that stuff. But I said, why did we change our names? They didn't have an answer for that.
Did you ever see that movie, was it My Big Fat Greek Wedding? Do you carry a bottle of Windex around with you?
Well, I should, and they kind of nailed that character, the grandfather, like the patriarch of the family. Yeah. That was just like my grandfather.
Yeah. Now, when you went to school, I read your book where you had a few problems there in school with reading.
I did. I was dyslexic. Of course, back then, they didn't really know what it was. I didn't get real good grades, disinterested a lot, attention span short. And I took a test. It was a IQ test, intelligence test of some sort. I don't quite remember what. But I scored very high on it. In fact, I scored so high, they called me in the office. They thought I had the answer and turned into a big scene. They accused me of cheating. And they never apologized to me. And it really pissed me off.
Mm-hmm.
I was probably a junior in high school.
And I think...
You know what? I was a senior, actually, because I wanted to quit school and join the Marines. And my dad made a deal with me. I was 17 at the time. And I wanted to get in a reserve unit that was in town there. All my buddies were in it. He said if I stayed and graduated, my mom and dad would sign for me. And so I took the oath. I was 17. I was 1965, but I didn't leave for boot camp till 1966.
Well, that IQ test, it wasn't words, it was more of pictures and drawings, wasn't it?
Exactly. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I don't know what they are, what type of tests they are, and I'm not even sure how they score it. But somehow I scored very, very high on it. Yeah. Because of the comparison to my grades. And it's really the first time I kind of got mad at my parents because initially they thought, well, he must have cheated. The school's got us down here. And then finally, I looked at my mom. I told my mom, I said, I did not cheat on that test. And so it turned into a big scene. And like I said, I left the office, no apology. Basically, they thought I had stolen the answer somewhere, had them hidden somewhere. Yeah.
Now, did you play any sports in school? Or
no,
you had
I started surfing is what I did. And I started hanging out with, they were kind of outlaws in their own right, surfer guys. And we'd go in the morning sometimes before school, after school. But I actually started surfing probably when I was 13 years old. I started hanging around with a crowd of guys, some of them pretty athletically inclined. One of the guys, the Dodgers were trying to scout him out.
Wow.
And he was a hell of a pitcher. And, of course, he wanted to spend the summer surfing and told a scout, well, I'll get a hold of you at the end of the summer, and which was like a death sentence. He got a hold of the scout at the end of the summer. Says, okay, I'm ready. And he says, hey, boy, we passed you by. We got about 3 people to replace you already.
Yeah. You mentioned something at a young age that you saw when you were out with your parents. I think you guys were coming out of a restaurant or a business, or maybe an Italian restaurant.
Italian restaurant with my father. And this guy spoke broken English. He was an immigrant from Italy. And, he was in the restaurant business. My family was in the restaurant business. I don't know if there was any closer connection than that. But they went down there and we had lunch. And as we exited the restaurant, my father and this Italian guy were standing out, the restaurant owner were standing out front. Mm-hmm. And up the street, man, you could hear this noise coming. And they pulled right up to the signal about 15, 20 feet from me. And it was this guy on a Harley Davidson up to, for that particular point in time. He had his sunglasses pushed on the top of his head. He had a Levi vest cut off. I don't know what was on the back. I couldn't read it. But it had this distinct sound, and it was the clutch basket turning and making this rattling sound that would become very familiar to me about a decade later. The light change, this guy just shot through the intersection. And I basically metaphorically jumped on the back of that motorcycle. And the guy with my dad just went ballistic. And he screamed and yelled, and he said, look, that's your America. And he spit on the ground, and he got pretty upset. And I was thinking, wow, that's quite a reaction to not interacting with anybody. I was minding my own business, but everybody on the street corner was reacting to just his presence there. And it looked pretty cool to me as a kid, you know. So that's kind of where I got my first desire to be an outlaw biker, I guess, if you will.
Before you started surfing, you were kind of an outcast at school, right?
Well, yeah, I think so. You know, I was, my early years, I was a little bit overweight and wasn't in with the cool guys. And, you know, one particular summer I started surfing. I lost all that baby fat. I came back to school next year. I was a pretty good surfer, and a lot of the surfing crew in the school knew it. And all of a sudden I became somewhat popular, and it just didn't sit right with me.
But yeah, because those were the people that were bullying you before. Now they want to be your friends, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I kind of started on my adventure, if you will. And I was kind of the class clown. I wasn't a mean kid. I didn't do anything mean, but I told you earlier, I think off camera, my parents moved up to Camarillo, California to get me out of harm's way. They didn't want me to get in trouble. And there was an outlaw motorcycle club up there. And some of the members became prominent members in the Hells Angels itself. Paul Ibbott's Animal, he was the guy at Altamont. If anybody's seen that movie, he was the guy running around with the fox head hat on. And he wound up knocking out Marty Ballin from the Jefferson Airplane. Him and I went to elementary school together, then high school together. And then we both hung out with this bike club, the Question Marks, that, you know, several of them became prominent Hells Angels later, like I just mentioned.
There, so you came out of high school, you were already signed up to go in the Marine Corps Reserve.
Right.
Somewhere along the line there, you got married to your high school sweetheart, is that right?
I did. Cheryl, little gal from Canada.
Is she the one that was having trouble with a bully in school, and you went and kind of straightened that out?
Yeah. There was a bully in school that was picking on her and my cousin. I had two cousins, Patty and Chrissy Alexakis, in school, and then my wife. They all hung out together, and this guy was picking on him. He was saying, but at the time were provocative remarks, you know, like today's standards, it was probably nothing, you know. And so I went to stick up for the girls, and I just told the guy, hey, you know, leave the girls alone. And he said, okay, no problem. And we shook hands. And as I turned to walk away, he clocked me from behind. And I went off on this guy. He was there. I had his head stuck in a mud puddle with water in it. I don't think I was in any intention to really drown him, but I kind of lost my temper. And, but I was a hero to the girls.
Oh, yeah, I'll bet.
Yeah.
I'll bet.
Got kicked out of school.
Yeah. Oh, you did for that?
I think I did, yeah. And Mr. Killingsworth, I still remember his name, wrote in the report, George was trying to be a knight in shining armor, but we're going to still have to discipline him.
Yeah, yeah. Well, back in those days, that's what guys did. You know, I think you and I are just, 8 or 9 years apart in age, but it was kind of like that when I went through school too.
You're a little bit younger than me, I think, aren't you?
Yeah, not much. You know, this is like the geriatric squad having a podcast here. So,
well, I hear you. You know, I have I'm doing the same thing, but it's a lot of fun.
It is. I love it. I'm having a blast.
It's a lot of fun.
So you're in the reserves, and you got to do your boot camp and your 2 weekends a month in the summer.
Yeah, 6 months active, and then 2 weeks a month. But you know, plus 1 month, one weekend out of the month. You go down, you know, we were a rifle platoon company, 0311th company. And, you know, we would go down to Pendleton a lot and do exercises and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. And did you have a regular job during that time also?
I did. I worked for General Telephone as a cable troubleshooter, and initially as a splicer. And then I became like a troubleshooter. And, you know, I got in trouble in the Marines. I got in trouble with one of the gunnery sergeants and got activated, went down to Camp Pendleton, and I think that high school IQ test had something to do with it. I know I scored real high on a lot of the tests in the Marines and whatnot, and they gave me activated me, then gave me a discharge, a general discharge under honorable conditions, and then I wound up going to work for the DOD.
You want to tell the story, what led to the discharge?
Well, we can,
On the range?
On the range. Well, this guy had been riding me, and I had kept warning him, don't ride me. And I said, I'm going to make you look like a fool in front of everybody. And he kept it up. And we were on the rifle range. We were in standing position, firing down line. He said something, snarky to me. And so I told, there was like 4 or 5 people between us. I told him to clear the line, get off the firing line here. And I put my rifle down to my side, and I said, draw. And I knew he wouldn't. Thank God he didn't, because I had no telling what I would have done. But he ran off the firing line. I got court-martialed. That's how I got activated. And they sent me down to Camp Pendleton. And next thing I knew, I'm working for the Department of Defense with a top secret security clearance.
That was surprising, I got to say. That was,
there was a Point Mugu and Port Hueneme. Point Mugu was a missile testing center. And also off of Point Mugu, I can't remember. I haven't read the book in a long time. Do I talk about the submarine surveillance system in the book?
No.
There's a submarine surveillance system out there. We were in a Cold War with Russia at the time. And so there was a submarine surveillance system, RCA building, they called it. And, they were looking for any type of Russian subs that were going to sneak into Southern California. And that was my job, was to keep it up all the time. And then they'd send me out to San Nicolas Island. I'd go out to San Nicolas, Santa Cruz, and then I'd take care of everything on the base at Point Mugu, and then later Port Hueneme.
Well, during your time in the Marine Corps, I read where you kind of, I guess you became disenchanted with the American dream.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Can you explain that just a little bit?
Well, I kind of bought into everything I was taught in school, and I realized things weren't as quiet as they seemed on the surface. And I think I just kind of stepped away from everything. I had my job, Department of Defense. Had my motorcycles. I got my first motorcycle in 1966, and so now it's the mid 70s, and I keep getting deeper and deeper into the outlaw bike culture. And certainly I was disillusioned. I never considered myself a criminal. I know a lot of people in law enforcement did. A lot of people after me from time to time. A lot of different agencies after me, but I just kind of saw myself as an outlaw. And I just, sometimes, you get so deep in the forest, you don't see the trees anymore. And I don't know if I'm answering your question satisfactorily, but.
Yeah, and I understand especially back at that time, it was a lot stricter environment where America is the best place in the world, and I think it still is personally. But
I do as well. I just spent 3 years in Spain, and it's a great country. I mean, sometimes I don't agree with the leaders,
Right. That's the truth.
And and the deal is, you get in a country like Spain, you got to be careful what you say. Over here, I guess you got to be careful what you say here as well. But you know what? I'm being a little sarcastic right now.
Yeah. And it was the same for me. We went to Colombia, and I used to bitch about the United States too. But after living in a third world country for 3 years, I love Colombia. It's my favorite country after the United States. But it really made me appreciate living here in the United States.
Right.
And
I don't know if we're gonna. I have a real interest in Colombia. Pablo Escobar he kind of held that country at bay for a while, didn't he?
He did. That he introduced a level of violence and drug trafficking that nobody had ever seen before.
Right.
His he is credited. We used to credit him with an estimated 10 to 15,000 murders. One of his remaining sicarios, who's now dead, a guy they call Popeye. We're on a documentary, and Popeye, they interview him on the same documentary. He said, those Americans, they say it's 10 to 15,000. He said the number's more like 50,000 people that Pablo was responsible for murdering.
Is that right?
Yeah. So that's
yeah. I mean, after you guys broke up the cartels down there, some of the guys in Europe had some dealings with FARC, and wound up getting real messy. They got you get $1 million worth of cocaine involved on credit, things can get messy.
whew. Yeah, I tell you what, they don't play.
No, they don't play. No, not at all.
They get real serious.
Yeah.
You mentioned an outlaw. So describe for us what you consider to be an outlaw.
My thought when I jumped on my motorcycle and I was making my statement as a youth, it was somebody that lived kind of by his own code of morality, didn't change it to suit his needs, had some honor in the decisions that he made in life. I always felt I was pretty fair to everybody. I don't know how law enforcement saw me. I know in the outlaw bike world, I think I had a reputation as being fair and open-minded. I was very receptive to other bike clubs, tried to get us to all get along in that outlaw bike world. Not that I had plans on taking over the world or anything, but I felt it would be much more productive if we weren't shooting at each other or bombing each other. And,
True.
But, along the paths, sometimes you have to feed your family, and things happen, and I mean, I don't want to cry about anything. I don't like to apologize for anything. The record speaks for itself, what happened. And I don't try to glorify my life. What I'm doing now is people ask me what I'm doing. I'm creating a historical record of what happened. I figured it's better for me to tell it than somebody 100 years from now that becomes interested in the outlaw bike world. And,
yeah.
So I'll just kind of lay down an outline and people can take it from there. I get people that write me that I know they know nothing about what they're talking about. And, I don't insult them by telling me full of shit, but sometimes I'd like to.
Oh, yeah. I agree. I know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about, don't you?
Yeah. Well, when I'll be honest with you, I had never, until I read your book, in the first, you got a little paragraph at the opening about an outlaw.
Right.
And I guess in my mind, I always thought an outlaw is a criminal.
Well, that's what people do.
Yep. And what I've since learned, not just from reading your book and whether I agree with your opinions or not,
right, yeah,
but also doing some research on definitions, outlaw versus criminal.
Right.
And in Wikipedia, I think I found the best description here. It says outlaw is still commonly used to mean those violating the law, or by extension, those living that lifestyle, whether actual criminals evading the law or those merely opposed to law and order, notions of conformity and authority. So I can see where an outlaw could not be a criminal, but a criminal pretty much is an outlaw.
Yeah, it's a contradictory statement in a sense. It's like I think I state somewhere in that opening paragraph that sometimes outlaws are driven to criminality, by the environment around them. And it, last time I got sentenced, when I went to prison in Texas, I kind of took that opening and I added to it, and I read it in open court to the judge. Judge Wu was my sentencing judge, and it's sometimes I don't even believe the stuff I read. I read it and I think, Jesus, man, was it really like that? And maybe it was. I don't know.
Yeah. I was reading, and that's where I was showing George before we started here. When I was reading this book, you guys know that listen regularly. I put tabs in here of things that interest me that I might want to talk about during our interview. And I was tabbing so much, and I thought, man, just read the book, because I'm thinking that couldn't happen. Well, man, did that really happen? So that's where it's leading to our questions today, because it's,
I had a lot of lucky breaks, and I don't know, perhaps you saw that too within the agency you were within. some guys just seem to be at the right place at the right time. And, a lot of people, they just say, it's bullshit. But I mean, things like that happen,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
People say timing's everything. Well, in a sense it is. And,
It really is. I'll be honest with you, George, I don't believe in luck or coincidence. I think everything happens for a reason.
Yeah. It's like I go down there to LA, and old man John, he was the leader down there. He saw something in me, took me under his wing, and next thing you know, I'm president of Los Angeles, and I'm right in the political arena, button heads with Sonny Barger.
Let me ask you so you're out of the Marine Corps, excuse me, and you got your bike. You've built your own bike. I mean, you're loving the motorcycle thing, and you're not a member of any club.
No,
but
I'm
you're
independent.
What's the progression? You got like a friend or a hang around and a prospect and a patch?
I hung around the question marks, and they were like endorsed by the Hells Angels at that time. They were called a 1% club. Question marks, their leader got stabbed and became partially paralyzed, a guy named Dick Woods. And I had met the Satan slaves through the question marks, and as the question marks were kind of unraveling in the 70s, I started going on my motorcycle down to LA and hanging out with the Satan slaves. I spent so much time with the Satan slaves that law enforcement misidentified me as actual Satan slave member. But I hung out with them, and ultimately I ran into old man John up on Kern River. I was with the slaves at the time, and he invited me to come to the Los Angeles clubhouse. And, basically from there, he put me under his wing, and next thing you know, I'm a Hell's Angel, and 6 months after that, I'm right in the middle of the politics of the Hell's Angels at large.
I guess the question I've got is are you not giving up some of your independence that an outlaw would represent, that they would crave, by doing their own thing, by joining a group of others?
Well, I'll tell you, you're absolutely right. And my parting statement to the Hells Angels, and I think it pissed some people off, was I said, we become the people we rebelled against. And I said, I want my freedom back. And I go, this just doesn't suit me anymore. And, I took my patch off, folded it up, put it on the table. Of course, a lot of people in the club have their own version of, although they weren't there, they have their own version of how it happened. And
amazing, isn't it?
It is amazing. It's just this, this vision they have. But I mean, that's basically what happened. I became disillusioned. We were fighting all these bike clubs. I had worked very hard to put peace between the Outlaws, the Banditos, the Mongols. Those are the big bike club, powerful bike clubs in the United States. And, my counterpart, if you will, who was actually my senior, Sonny, he didn't want to get along with anybody. He just didn't care. Mm-hmm. And so we used to butt heads a lot. But you start out free as a bird, and 50 years later you reflect back on it and you go, what am I doing here? Mm-hmm. I'm restricted by all these rules, regulations. I've got people telling me I can't be friends with this guy on Facebook because I'm a Hell's Angel and I don't like him, and you're still talking to him. I mean, it just got ludicrous to me.
Yeah, it's childish.
Yeah, very childish. And I thought to myself, the first time I got busted in 1986, I was looking at life on one charge and 20 years on the other charge. Then I get busted again in 2001, and I'm looking at 80, 90 years. So you start reflecting. It's funny. I was in solitary confinement the day we got attacked in New York when the Twin Towers fell, and I came out of that prison thinking a lot of things that transpired while I was in jail, people making maneuvers, and you know how it works. I mean, mm-hmm. you see, you were right in the middle of that dope game, and although it's it's a outlaw organization. It's people vying for power, you know. And, I mean, you guys killed Pablo, but it opened the void up, didn't it? And so, I mean, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I mean, I don't know, you know.
You know, and I don't want to make it my story, but I want to respond to that comment just because we all know you can go just about any street corner in the United States today and buy cocaine. And that's just the sad truth of our country.
Right.
But what we look at is the murder rate, how it dropped after Pablo died. And
Right.
you know, we checked the murder rate in Medellin before his death. And I challenge our listeners, go do the research. You're going to find out the same thing I'm telling you right now, because I don't accept what I say as the truth. You know, you fact check everything. We're all intelligent.
That's what I do. Yeah.
Yeah. The media wants to tell us what to think and how we should think about it. And I don't like that at all. So that's why I'm challenging you. Go do your own research. But this is what you find out. So we checked the murder rate before his death, and then we waited a couple months after his death. And what we found was that in 92 and 93, Medellin, Colombia was the murder capital of the world. After Pablo died, the murder rate in Medellin dropped by almost 80%.
That's amazing.
And believe it or not, not only did we take out Pablo, we took out the entire Medellin cartel, which was the very first time that was ever done on a cocaine manufacturing distribution organization. So, you know,
and did the Cali, were those guys a little bit more business-minded?
They were. They weren't quite as brutal. They were still brutal, believe me, but not quite as much as Pablo. And then we took them out, and then the North Valley cartel stepped up. We took them out, and then a guy named Don Berna, who's about ready to get out of prison here in the United States, he took over. You know, it's like you said, it's, you know, the heads step down, whether you retire, whether you're killed, you go to prison, and there's 100 people fighting out to take your position.
And they think they can do a better job than you.
Oh, yeah.
And they think they won't get caught.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing when they think you're down and out, man. They're not your friend anymore.
No, and that's the game. And you know, it's funny. Like, law enforcement always refers to the club as a gang. Like, we like to always refer to it as a motorcycle club. But you know, you get in that environment, and people see an opening, and they take advantage of it, you know. Yeah. And
there's a lot of strong personalities on both sides.
Very strong personalities in that world, and in the law enforcement world as well, you know. I don't know, you know. I saw a lot of things that happened over the years that amazed me. I kind of like the old school cops in Ventura, when, you know, they kind of let the street settle itself, in a sense. You know, is don't get out of line, don't hurt anybody. And I'm not going to say they turn their heads, but you know,
common respect.
Yeah. And you know, cops used to come by, and sometimes they get a cup of coffee at the clubhouse, you know, in the old days. But it's in the late 70s, you know, early 80s. But I mean, all that stuff stopped.
Well, it's like you said in the book. I think you guys used to, when you were a young HA, you guys would fight some naval guys from a base?
We used to fight the Seabees, the Navy base, but it was in good fun.
And then when it was over, whoever lost had to buy breakfast.
Yeah, there you go, you know. And we had a lot of fights down there. Even like as surfers, you know, we were fighting the Navy guys. But it's I don't
just
think
wasn't personal.
No, it wasn't personal. And you know, people nowadays, you know, you get in a fight with somebody, they go home and get their gun, and they come back, or they go out to their car, they got their gun under their seat. In the old days, it wasn't like that, you know.
Yeah,
nobody ever brought a gun out.
I live in Orlando, Florida. It's dangerous.
Yeah, is that right?
Well, you know, everybody carries a weapon now, and
right.
I mean, you hesitate to even blow a horn at anybody anymore.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I don't like it, but
I know, I'm being a smart ass.
Yeah, that's okay. That's all right. So when you're joining, so they ask you to be a prospect, okay? And,
right.
and how long do you have to do that, and what does that entail?
Well, now it's become very involved. You got to have 12 months as a associate of the club, or hang around, if you will. And then they want you to do another 12 months as a prospect before you're even considered for vote. And part of that happened because of something that happened in Los Angeles. It was a guy down there named Cliff Mallory, I don't know if you remember his name from the book.
I
He was
don't.
an informant.
Oh yeah, I do from the book, but I didn't know it before.
Yeah, and he just felt that he didn't want to be in prison anymore, and he cut a deal with the parole board and the Orange County cops, and he came home and had this beautiful young girlfriend who I always was suspect of for this guy. I was gone. She was a cop,
Yeah.
and but she wrote a book called Chain of Evidence. Haven't read it in years. I don't even remember how accurate it is, but kind of gives you the inner workings. The interesting thing was you had this guy Cliff working for the Orange County cops, and then you had explosions going on in Los Angeles. We were fighting the Mongols, and so there were explosions, machine gunnings. They found what we used to call the armory in downtown LA. Had 2,000 pounds of dynamite and anti-tank weapon, which I always found ridiculous. I used to ask old man John, I go, why do we need anti-tank weapons? I mean, the thing was huge to even move it,
Yeah.
But so yeah, it is funny. I can laugh now, but law enforcement was not sharing the information, and the best thing for the Hells Angels and other groups like myself, and I don't know if you want to call them bad guys. Some people are probably applauding my. He's finally come to the light. No, I'm being a smart ass, but they wouldn't even share the information. I mean, you've got this guy working for the Orange County cops.
Mm-hmm.
You've got these guys making bombs and blowing up the Mongols in downtown LA. So you've got the ATF, the FBI, Los Angeles Sheriffs, Los Angeles Police Department, the Glendale Police. That's where our clubhouse was, in Glendale. And nobody's sharing any information,
Yeah.
And
who wins?
Well,
you guys did.
Yeah, that's who wins. And it's like they finally caught up with a couple of the guys, but it was a decade later. And the only reason they caught up to them was because somebody got caught somewhere back east and said, you want to solve some murders,
Mm-hmm.
And of course they always want to solve a murder. So, they jumped all over that.
As a prospect, do you just come and go as you please? What's your responsibility?
Well, no, you don't. You're on a very tight schedule. You're kind of at the bidding of the members. It's kind of like a hazing, harassment. I remember one afternoon, one of the guys wanted a hamburger from a burger stand up in, I can't remember even the name of it. It was a burger stand up in San Francisco. And the idea was, he said, go get me a burger. Well, he knew I wasn't going to go up there and get him a burger. And I knew I wasn't going up there. So what I did is I called San Francisco, talked to one of the prospects up there, and I said, hey, go buy a burger at this place. Take it to the airlines, put it on a plane, and send it to me in a box. And that's what he did. I had it down there in 2 or 3 hours, And, the only guy I showed up at the clubhouse with it, and he kind of looked at me and shook his head, and the only thing he told me was it's not hot enough. When he got it, just harassment, petty stuff. But, it can also get serious too, If somebody may want you to go check somebody out, get somebody's home address, and then, unknowingly and maybe even unwittingly become part of a conspiracy without realizing it. You turn over a piece of paper to somebody and something happens to that guy and they go to this guy's house and, find it on your notepad, it creates a problem for you.
Yeah.
So, you're opening yourself up to a lot of stuff, in the old days. And I tried to straighten some of that stuff up. People they'd send you out to go steal a bike, not because they wanted you to steal the bike, because they wanted to prove you weren't a cop. You wouldn't go out and steal a bike if you were a cop. And it just didn't make a lot of sense to me. That was one of the rules I kind of pushed aside over the years. I just said, this doesn't make any sense. And some of the old guys mumbled about it and grumbled about it. But you got to make way for the younger generation and the new thoughts, new ideas and leadership and whatnot.
Yeah.
But, my idea, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead of myself, but when I got out of prison, I'm getting ahead of myself, I guess. I carried the torch, and I guess you know that, right?
Oh, yeah, we're going to get to that part.
Okay. So I don't know if I'm explaining myself well or if I'm jumping around too much, but
No, you're doing fine. This is your story. It's I've got questions here, just trying to keep it going because there's some of our listeners. I'm not sure they understand the progression from a hang around to a prospect to a full patch member.
you're a hang around. Got to do 12 months as a hang around. Then you're a prospect. Got to do minimum 12 months as a prospect. I got in the club in 4 months, but all that changed after that guy Cliff Mallory infiltrated the club as an informant.
Yeah,
and he hurt a lot of people. The guy that did that, he set up. His target was Ray Glore, who was the new president in Los Angeles, and he wound up getting murdered.
Wow.
He sent somebody over to that armory, and the cops were waiting when they got there. So word travels fast in that underground lifestyle, and somebody took exception to that, and whether he was or wasn't held him responsible.
Tell us about when you finally got full patch, when you finally became a full-fledged member of the HAs.
Well, I got a phone call from the old man. He told me, make sure you come down to, it was December 26th. And he said, make sure you come down tonight, make sure you're on your bike. And that to me was sort of a hint, because you couldn't get voted in the club unless you were riding. And a lot of times in the wintertime, the guys would make some story. I had a flat tire or whatever. They just didn't want to freeze their ass off, because I had to travel from Ojai Valley to LA a lot. I was still living up in Ojai with my wife and kids, but working for the Department of Defense. But I went down. I went in this room, got called into the meeting. I went in the room and lined with Hell's Angels, everybody staring at me. And basically they said, we're going to become number one in your life. And you got to put your wife and your kids and your mom and your dad and your job, everything's got to come second now. If you want to take this step, we're the primary people in your life, and we come first. And, I couldn't think of anything to say at first, and I squeaked out, I know. And then, old man John, he had a real gruff voice. And he goes, yeah, no, that's fine. And he told Paul, one of the members, he goes, throw that patch at him. And they threw the patch at me, and I held it up, and I held it out, looked at it, and it looked like that emblem, the death heads on the back, was staring at me. Mm-hmm. And I put the patch on, and he goes, now we're going to go down to San Bernardino. We're going to get your patch. We rode down to San Bernardino, and there was an old woman down there named Betty that used to hand make all the Hell's Angel patches for all over the world. And she actually made the patch and then sewed it on my jacket the next morning, on the 27th. So it was quite a sight. We would go to her house. Been there, a few times, but we weren't allowed to smoke in the house, and we weren't allowed to cuss in the house. And so when she gave me my patch, and there was like 4 or 5 guys with me, and she told me no speeding down the street. And, that lasted about a half a block. I was so excited. Yeah.
She knew what was coming.
Oh, she knew it was coming. She'd been through this rodeo before,
How did you feel at that moment when you finally, this is something you were striving to become and you made it?
I felt like I had the world at my fingertips. Everything I wanted was right here. Poignant moment as I got deeper and deeper and deeper into the Hells Angels, and I found out there's a lot of political stuff going on, a lot of infighting, and then I found out there were a lot of cops out there wanting to make a career on our lifestyle, and whether right or wrong, some of them were very honorable, but some of them were probably just as bad as some of the people they were investigating. I don't know how you feel about me saying that, but
hey, this is your story, man.
Yeah, It was a very interesting, first 5 years was very interesting. It was like just an unbelievable education.
I will say, on behalf of all the honest cops out there, I was a cop for 38 years. I'm loyal. I will bleed blue till the day I die.
Sure, I get it.
But nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop.
Yeah, I can imagine that,
Because they all makes us look like crap.
Yeah, and guys go out there and risk their life every day, and then somebody tarnishes the name. I get it, and this may sound ironic to you. I used to feel the same way about it in the Hells Angels when I saw people doing things, doing drug ripoffs and drug burns and taking things from people, bullying them. I do everything in my power to push them out of the club. And, over 40 years, you make a lot of enemies doing it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, George will be going for a good little while now. We're going to go ahead and take a break from today's episode, and we'll bring you back for part 2 tomorrow. To all our listeners, thank you so much for joining us here. This is George Christie, 40-year member of the Hells Angels, 35 of that as a president and one of the leaders in the international organization. We're going to get us some more stories. I've got some questions for him out of his book. So be sure you come back tomorrow. Join us here on the Game of Crimes. And until then, be safe. We'll see you tomorrow.